In the heart of Germany stands one of the most iconic sites on the continent. Heidelberg. A castle, once glorious beyond compare, now in ruins. As Europe emerged from the Dark Ages, the most brilliant light of learning emanated from this city. The vibrant river and mountains teemed with wild creatures. Animals beckoned to scientists and physicians as subjects for study and inspiration. But new ideas about religion soon pitted Protestant against Catholic, sparking a war that would tear Europe asunder and reduce the great castle to rubble. Amidst human tragedy, the animals managed to adapt and even thrive, writing a new chapter in the history of Heidelberg. Heidelberg Castle was once among the most majestic sights in Europe. The sunny slopes of the surrounding Odenwald Mountains provided unsurpassed natural bounty. At the foot of the castle, the river Neckar linked Heidelberg to the mighty Rhine and to the world. Powerful rulers here served the Holy Roman Empire. They turned Heidelberg into the foremost center of learning in Europe. In every direction, nature's living laboratory offered up a wealth of plants and animals to be studied. A new era of science blossomed in a most unexpected place, the Church of the Holy Spirit. Just a stone's throw from the castle, in the heart of Old Town Heidelberg. Today, the church watches over a different kind of new beginning. Peregrine falcons had nearly disappeared by the end of the 20th century, victims of pesticide exposure. But the birds are making a comeback, and they've found an ideal breeding place in the church bell tower. Three new chicks have just emerged. Their parents take turns gently sitting on them to keep them warm. It will be 42 days until they're big enough to leave the nest. Until then, the parents will provide a steady stream of pigeons and doves and round-the-clock care. Beneath the bell tower nursery lies the birthplace of the very first university in Germany, now more than 600 years old. Founded in 1386, the young school soon became a center of philosophy and medicine. The church coffers provided funding, and its halls offered space for research. After centuries of the Dark Ages, the light of science and medicine at last shined in Heidelberg. Like those early academics, the young peregrines have plenty to discover in the surrounding landscape. Rich hunting grounds are right on their doorstep, just beyond the castle ruins. As the male leaves in search of food, he heads southeast to the foothills of the Odenwald Mountains. Odenwald means Forest of Legends. Today, it's a 1,000 square mile nature preserve, the perfect place for a legendary hunter to return. Beneath the canopy are many of the same plants and animals that were here 600 years ago. Heidelberg's early physicians sought them out, walking this forest to find ingredients for their concoctions and cures. This male European toad has just emerged from a state of suspended animation. It spent the winter buried underground, as still as death. Then, when nighttime temperatures rose to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit and a rejuvenating rain soaked the earth, thousands emerged en masse. His singular mission is to get to the breeding pond, the same one he was born in. To get there, he'll cover almost half a mile a day. The going gets tough, but he can't afford to be late. En route, the male keeps a lookout for a female. If he finds one, he'll hop on board and let her carry him the rest of the way. She's bigger, but in addition to carrying him, she's hauling thousands of unfertilized eggs in her abdomen. Finally, their goal is in sight. Not a woodland pond, but Heidelberg Castle. The castle's spring-fed fountains are one of the most important amphibian spawning grounds in the region. This may look like traditional mating, but actual fertilization happens in the water. She lays a string of eggs, and from his prime position on her back, he fertilizes them as they emerge. They'll swim together for up to 12 hours, stringing yards of fertilized eggs among the aquatic plants and branches. A jelly-like substance forms a protective cover around the eggs as they develop. These grass frog eggs operate on the same principle, only they're arranged in a cluster instead of a string, providing a little more protection. The outermost eggs remain vulnerable, and a little alpine newt has decided that one would make a very nice meal. Fortunately, there are a few thousand left. These days, the frogs and toads can get on with mating here, unmolested by humans. In the 15th century, they didn't have it so good. Amphibians like them were raw materials for medicine that was supposed to impart their animal abilities to humans. Their moist, permeable skin was the charm. Salamanders were boiled alive to make lotions for treating burns. Frogs were cooked in sesame oil to cure arthritis and gout. Such ideas might seem ludicrous today, but many modern drugs are derived from chemicals in frog skin. A line can be drawn from modern pharmacology directly back to these first laboratory kitchens. While knowledge grew, the old power of mythology and symbolism still influenced science. For inspiration, physicians turned to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. Wrapped on his staff is one of the most enduring animal totems in medicine, the snake. The ability to shed its skin was, to scientists of the day, nothing short of rejuvenation, the ultimate healing power. Heidelberg's local serpent is a rarity. In Germany, the Aesculapian snake only exists in 3 isolated areas, one being the Odenwald Mountains. At almost 6 feet long, it's the longest snake in this country. It keeps its head up while cruising, to see its surroundings and pick up scents with its forked tongue. Mice and other small mammals are its favorite food, but it won't turn up its nose at lizards or amphibians. It's also an excellent climber, so even birds aren't safe. When it finds prey, the snake kills by constriction, as it lacks the venom that has fascinated scientists for centuries. Fortunately, modern science no longer condemns snakes to the apothecary's pot. But their appearance as a symbol of the medical profession endures. As the 16th century dawned, science at Heidelberg had already progressed by leaps and bounds. The Book of Medicine, written here, was the most comprehensive work of medical science in its time. Its 13 volumes contain over 18,000 remedies and medicinal plants, many of which are still acknowledged today. Its creator was none other than Heidelberg's Louis V, who ruled the city during the early 16th century. It took him more than 20 years to write these books by hand. When he wasn't writing, Louis V was busy overseeing a massive expansion project. He enlarged the castle's library to fit the ever-growing number of books. More construction followed. Details of this architecture point to his love of nature. Like the physicians, Heidelberg's architects looked to the surrounding natural world for inspiration. They didn't have to look far. Right below the castle flows the Neckar River. It's home to an animal that inspires all builders: the beaver. Like Louis V and his forebearers, this family of beavers has built its stately home over many generations. Last year's offspring are almost as big as their parents. These kits will continue to live in the family keep for around 2 years before striking out on their own to become the architects of a brand new wetland. Since beavers spend much of their lives in the water, it's critical that they're well waterproofed. They spend hours grooming and oiling their fur. Glands between their back legs secrete an oily substance called castoreum, which they meticulously comb through their fur. This substance made beavers a target of Heidelberg's burgeoning medical science. Physicians extracted the castoreum from these glands to use as a remedy for everything from ulcers to fevers to cramps and rheumatism. The secret to its healing properties lies in the beaver's diet. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, the raw ingredient of aspirin. The waterproofing castoreum contains high levels of this compound. For the beavers, though, Willow branches are just food. They can grow to up to 66 pounds, eating little else. Their teeth are specially designed for the job, coated in a hard layer of red iron oxide. As a beaver's teeth grind over each other, they sharpen to a blade. Wood that's too tough to eat becomes building material. Beavers use the water to transport big willow boughs. It's much easier and safer to float and swim than to drag them over land. Moving goods up and down the river was key to the growth of Heidelberg as well. 14 miles downstream, the river Neckar flows into the Rhine, one of Europe's most important trade routes. Spices and exotic plants from all over the world made their way upriver to the city. On the opposite bank from the castle, non-native plants found a surprisingly favorable climate. The southern exposure of the Odenwald Mountains makes this one of the warmest regions of Germany. Mediterranean plants that are seldom found north of the Alps thrive here. Almond, peach, and apricot trees, even pomegranates bear fruit here. Terraced orchards, divided by stone walls, make the most of the sunshine. Warm weather creatures take advantage as well. Sand lizards and more common wall lizards dwell in the many cracks and crevices. As cold-blooded reptiles, they can't internally regulate their body temperature, so they have to live somewhere with both warming sunshine and cooling shade. Their scaly skin keeps them from losing moisture. But as this sand lizard grows, he needs to replace his jacket. This sloughing of skin happens many times a year. To ease the itch and help the process along, the lizards make good use of the rough stone walls. The stones are also a great place to soak up the morning sun after a chilly night. Once the lizards have warmed up their muscles, they can head out to hunt. Cocking their heads, they scan the surroundings. With so many flowering trees, insects are never in short supply. It's all a matter of being quicker than the bug. There are always surprises. An ant puts up a valiant fight over this grasshopper. A risky move against a hungry sand lizard, but it makes off with a morsel to bring back to the nest. Among the many flowering trees, one bug reigns. Honeybees are crucial pollinators. A new colony is setting up a nest in one of the terrace walls. With their queen protected, they get to work building a nursery of honeycomb. They glue their structure together with propolis, a mixture of plant oils, sap, and wax fermented with bee saliva. It has the added benefit of protecting the surface of the nest from bacteria and fungi. In the field of pharmacology, Heidelberg's bees were way ahead of its human scientists. Nursery ready, the queen begins to lay her eggs, depositing one into each cell. Now it's up to the youngest bees to care for the larvae, all of which are female. After 21 days, they welcome their new sister bees into the hive. The sunny, south-facing bank of Heidelberg doesn't just appeal to plants and animals. Students from the university once came here to stroll and ponder life's questions. Today, the place is still known as the Philosopher's Way. Nature was a place for reflection and contemplation. The place for serious research was back across the river. The Church of the Holy Spirit had been the birthplace of the great university. Now it assumed a new role as the biggest library of the Renaissance in Germany. The vast galleries were filled with books that represented the best available knowledge on all subjects. The brightly lit rooms were perfect for reading. One of the most cherished manuscripts was The Art of Falconry, written by the Holy Roman Emperor Kaiser Frederick himself in 1248. It's considered the first work of zoology written in the spirit of modern science. In Heidelberg's golden age, people raided falcon nests for chicks to hand rear for sport. Today, the 3 chicks living in the church bell tower have no such problems. They can take in the best view of the city while waiting for their mother to return with food. 6 weeks have passed since they hatched. Their fluffy down has given way to proper feathers for flight. Instinct tells them to flap, but these 2 chicks don't have the confidence for takeoff just yet. Their brave sibling, though, has already made it to a nearby rooftop, just in time to miss the food delivery at the nest. The others are waiting eagerly as their mother returns with a pigeon. But there's no reward for being timid. She pulls the meal back to the window. If they want to eat, they'll have to step out of their comfort zone and take a leap of faith. The brave chick tries to catch up with its mother. But landing on the steep tower is a tough maneuver for a first outing. It's a big day for the young falcons, as they change from nest-bound chicks to fully fledged adults. In the early 1600s, a fledgling prince struggled with the sudden ascent to power. Frederick V was only 14 years old when he assumed the rule of Heidelberg. The young prince found himself on the cusp of history. The Protestant Reformation had been gaining influence in Germany, and Heidelberg had become a Protestant city, ruled now by a Protestant prince. Tensions with the Catholic Church in Rome were on the rise. But the young ruler's reign was also in danger on another front, closer to home. By the age of 18, he began to suffer from strange fevers. Heidelberg's best doctors claim that foul odors from swamps along the river Neckar were to blame. They weren't too far off. It wasn't the swamp air, but the mosquitoes that bred there. Today, we think of malaria as a tropical disease, but in the early 17th century, mosquitoes carrying the malaria parasite existed well into the temperate zone. The mosquitoes still persist in Heidelberg's wetlands today, but they no longer carry the disease. Tiny rafts of mosquito eggs float on the stagnant surface of one of the Neckar's small tributaries. The islands are only the size of a grain of rice, but hold between 200 and 300 eggs. Underneath, the larvae have already begun to hatch. They continually filter feed microscopic plankton from the water. They breathe through their tails, which poke like snorkels through the surface film. They'll shed their skin 3 times as larvae, growing larger each time. On the 4th shed, they become pupa, with recognizable wings and eyes. From the pupa, they emerge as adult mosquitoes to break the water's surface. It would take doctors almost 3 more centuries to trace malaria to mosquitoes. Prince Frederick's doctors held to the belief that foul air was to blame. The word malaria literally means bad air. And the best way to combat bad air was with pleasant-smelling fragrances. The doctors of Heidelberg gathered bundles of flowers from the Odenwald Mountains to treat the ailing prince. They dried the flowers and infused them in oil to concentrate their fragrance. Today, the practice is known as aromatherapy. The blossoms may have eased young Frederick's fever, but he remained sickly and weak. When he wasn't suffering, he sought solace in nature and a blossoming love for his young wife, Elizabeth Stuart, the English king's daughter. To honor her, he built the Elizabeth Gate. This declaration of love is covered in images of tiny natural wonders. To complement the gate, he commissioned a French engineer to lay out a sumptuous garden. At the time of its creation, many considered it the 8th wonder of the world. It was to be the embodiment of creation itself, a veritable Garden of Eden. He planted such a variety of flowers that there would be blooms every month of the year. He built balconies to overlook the splendor, secret grottos, and elaborate spring-fed fountains. The very fountains that today are a haven for amphibians. These alpine newts are having their annual spring mixer. The males are spruced up for the occasion. Their normally drab skin has turned bright and iridescent. The females keep their usual brownish-gray attire, but their bellies swell with unfertilized eggs. The male's dragon-like crest is enlarged, as is his cloaca, the reproductive opening at the base of his tail. Competition is fierce. Not all will find a mate. The sense of smell plays a big role in courtship. Although newts breathe air, an organ in their mouths can detect smells underwater. That way, he can tell if she's ready for wooing. The time is right, so he vibrates his tail to show he's ready. And that seals the deal for her. Many other creatures rely on the fountains for reproduction. Fire salamanders have already made it, but the females need these pools to give birth to their live larvae. There's an unexpected problem. Amorous male toads fresh in from the forest are looking for mates. They'll latch on to anything that moves. The salamander mother is undeterred. One by one, her babies emerge in their protective sacs. As each one drifts to the bottom, the sac bursts and a fully developed larva emerges. After a moment to recover from the ordeal, it's ready to swim and feed. For now, it breathes through feathery gills. Most other amphibians begin as fertilized eggs. Being born as a group offers some protection. The toad tadpoles also have gills. The cold, oxygen-rich water is perfect in this larval phase. But the transformation to terrestrial animals has already begun. Each species proceeds in its own particular way. The toad's gills retract and become internal. Meanwhile, they're developing lungs. Grass frog tadpoles are already growing hind legs. Alpine newts still have external gills, but they already have all four legs. Such rapid development requires a lot of fuel. A veritable banquet of water fleas, worms, and insect larvae does the trick. New fire salamanders are just as voracious. They're already getting their adult spots. Each pattern is unique, like a fingerprint. Every species follows a different schedule, but the moment of transformation eventually arrives for all. Young toads break their watery confines and step onto land. Tadpoles no more. They look almost identical to their parents. Only a lot smaller. When you're that tiny, everything is an obstacle. But soon, the tables will turn. In 17th century Heidelberg, a big transformation was also underway. A storm was brewing over Europe, the likes of which no one had seen. The Holy Roman Empire was determined to enforce Catholicism in all its territories. Heidelberg stood in direct opposition. The ideas that fueled the Reformation flowed from its Protestant chapel. Frederick V, the young, sickly prince, pledged to defend the Protestant faith. Under pressure from his allies, Frederick traveled to Prague to be crowned the Protestant king. His reign would be so brief that history now calls him the Winter King. The Catholic League answered this provocation with full military might. In 1620, Frederick's forces met the Catholic army on the banks of the Vltava River in what is now the Czech Republic. The Protestant troops were annihilated, and Frederick fled into exile. Still, the Catholic forces were not satisfied. They wanted to root out the Reformation at its core. So they took aim at Heidelberg itself. Fear spread through the city. People saw omens in the natural world. Common swifts, seeming to appear out of nowhere like a vast winged army, were believed to predict bad things to come. Their unsettling cry earned them the name Screech Devils. But these spring migrants were merely harbingers of fair weather. Swifts live their lives in the air. They can stay in the skies for months without landing. They do almost everything on the wing. But they have to land to nest and raise young. Every year, they make the journey from the Sahara Desert to Germany. They're drawn to rocky cliffs, and since its destruction, to the old battlements of Heidelberg. A hole in an old turret is the perfect spot. The castle walls are well occupied. While the swifts have the turret and the falcons are in the belfry, a family of common kestrels has claimed an arrow slip. The parents patrol constantly, scoping for enemies or prey. Kestrels hover in midair to scan the ground below. Their sharp eyes can detect the faintest movement in the grass. Thanks to their parents' hunting skills, the chicks don't have to wait long to be fed. In the castle tower next door, the 5-week-old swift chicks have grown their adult feathers. Only their white faces betray them as youngsters. In just another week, they'll be making their first trek to Africa, not coming to rest until they have chicks of their own. No other bird spends as much of its life on the wing. Adult swifts that haven't managed to breed this year aren't caught sitting still. In the evenings, they organize into huge groups called screaming parties. Together, they climb to heights of between 6,000 and 9,000 feet. They'll spend the entire night circling high above the castle. They can even sleep on the wing by shutting down half their brain at a time. On mild summer nights, hundreds of pipistrelle bats swarm through the battlements. It's thought that the adults are showing their offspring the best places for hibernation when winter comes in a few months' time. Ounce for ounce, the common pipistrelle is one of the world's smallest mammals, weighing little more than a sugar cube. When its wings are folded, it's smaller than a matchbox. The pipistrelles share the castle walls with larger mouse-eared bats. Up to 1,000 congregate here. They spent winter tucked deep into the battlements, slowing their metabolism and living off of fat stores. Now that it's warm, they're active, nabbing as many bugs as they can while the pickings are good. Whatever the season, the castle walls provide all the protection the bats need. The same could not be said for the 17th century citizens of Heidelberg. Frederick V had put his effort into lavish gardens at the expense of strong fortifications. In July 1622, the Catholic army crossed the river Neckar. For 11 weeks, they laid siege to Heidelberg. On the 19th of September, 1622, the city fell. The Catholic army razed Heidelberg Castle and city to the ground. The exiled Frederick V never returned home. The ensuing 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics tore Europe apart. Entire regions lay in waste. Plague and starvation took an even greater toll. But few places suffered more than Heidelberg. Frederick's magnificent gardens, once considered the eighth wonder of the world, lay in ruin. The precious library, one of the greatest seats of learning Europe had ever known, was dismantled. The victorious Catholics sawed church pews into chests for transport and shipped the university's treasured collection of books to Rome as a gift to the Pope. For many years, the castle remained uninhabited. In Heidelberg, the Reformation was over. The city was Catholic once more. The young peregrine falcons are undergoing a conversion of their own. They've left their home in the Protestant Church of the Holy Spirit and have come to rest on the nearby Jesuit church. From here, they make daily trips into the forest for intensive training. As the world's fastest birds, they'll soon be dive-bombing their prey at up to 240 miles per hour. But they have to learn how to harness all that speed. Mother tempts her offspring with a piece of food. All three youngsters join in the game of keep away. It's all in service of perfecting the high-speed maneuvers that will keep them and their future families well fed. One day, Mother and Father won't show up with food. The young falcons will be on their own. "40 years after the fall of Heidelberg, a precocious youngster was also stepping out into the world. A young girl named Lieselot, granddaughter of Frederick V, brought a ray of hope to the beleaguered city. She was a boisterous child who loved to play in nature. In the spirit of Heidelberg's past, she was a budding scientist who is said to have kept snakes in her room. But the times were against the curious Lieselot. In the mid-17th century, the field of science was off limits to women. Instead, Lieselot was married into the court of Louis XIV of France. Her family hoped that the marriage would inspire the powerful Catholic Sun King to protect their homeland. They were wrong. In 1688, French troops invaded and once again destroyed the city of Heidelberg. Citizens were burned alive in churches, and the city was razed yet again. Lieselot could do nothing to stop the carnage, and blamed herself. She wrote, "All night, as soon as I fall asleep a little, I see all the destruction, and then I drift and cannot sleep again. I lament that I am the downfall of my fatherland." In the years that followed, the once great city fell into a fairy tale sleep among the ruins. But in the rubble of lost glory, animals found a haven. The castle that could not protect its people now succeeds in protecting its wildlife. Almost by accident, Heidelberg has again become a living laboratory of natural science, in its own way, living up to its promise from centuries ago.